Here's a rewritten, more engaging and emotional version of your first scene in simple conversational English. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the Adewale family living room in Idan, but Kemi hardly noticed. Her heart sank as Ifeoma, her husband's sister, leaned back in her chair with that all-too-familiar smirk. "Look at you," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "You really belong in the kitchen, not at this table. More like a servant than a wife." The words cut deeper than Kemi expected. Around the room, laughter erupted, sharp and cruel, bouncing off the walls. Cousins and aunts glanced at each other, some trying to stifle their giggles, others openly enjoying the spectacle. Kemi forced a smile, but inside her chest felt tight, as if someone had pressed down on it. She could feel the sting of humiliation creeping into every corner of her mind. Yet, amid the laughter and sneers, Kemi's eyes never left Ifeoma. There was something in that gaze, a quiet determination, a fire that refused to be snuffed out. She swallowed her hurt, held her head high, and let the laughter roll over her. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break, at least not today. If you like, I can now rewrite all 15 beats like this, keeping them viral, emotional, and hyper-realistic so it flows naturally into a 4,000-word script. Do you want me to do that next? Here's a rewritten, more engaging and emotional version of the second beat in simple conversational English. Kemi sat there, smiling politely, but inside her chest felt heavy, like a storm brewing behind her ribs. Every laugh, every sneer from Ifeoma had a weight to it, and yet she had learned to hide it. This wasn't the first time she had been mocked by her husband's family. From the day she married into the Adewale household, whispers about her humble beginnings and snide remarks about her simple clothes had followed her like shadows. She remembered the first time her mother-in-law had rolled her eyes at the modest lunch Kemi had prepared, commenting, "In our family, we eat properly, not like commoners." And Ifeoma, oh Ifeoma, she had never let a chance slip to point out how Kemi didn't belong. Each insult was like a tiny cut, invisible to others, but Kemi could feel them all. The hurt piled up quietly, day after day, meal after meal, gathering like clouds that refused to break. Yet, Kemi had learned something important. She would not let their words control her. She had a fire deep inside, one that no sneer could extinguish. Every time someone laughed at her, that fire grew, a quiet strength she carried in silence. People saw her as timid, weak, maybe even foolishly patient, but they didn't know the battles she fought alone. As she sat there, forcing her smile, she made a promise to herself. One day they would see her true worth. Not through words, not through arguments, but through something undeniable, something that would leave them speechless. For now, she let the laughter roll over her, keeping her calm on the outside, while inside, determination blazed brighter than ever. If you want, I can continue with beat 3, the wedding pressure, keeping the same viral, emotional, and cinematic style, so the story builds naturally. Do you want me to do that next? Here's a rewritten, more engaging and emotional version of the third beat in simple conversational English. Weeks later, the topic of Ifeoma's wedding filled every conversation in the Adewale household. She could barely contain her excitement, showing off every little plan with the kind of pride that made people stare. "I want the best hall in Idan," she said one evening, twirling her fingers in the air like she was already queen of the event. "Nothing less will do. It has to be perfect." But beneath the sparkling words, there was a tension in her voice. When she mentioned the price, her brow furrowed, and a slight frown broke through her carefully painted smile. "It's so expensive," she sighed, letting her words hang in the air, heavy with meaning. She didn't ask directly, but everyone around her understood the hint. Somebody had better help cover this, or her dream wedding might crumble. Kemi watched silently, sitting across the room, pretending to sip her tea. She noticed the desperation hidden behind Ifeoma's boasts, the subtle way she looked at her parents and cousins, almost as if sizing up who could be strong enough or foolish enough to lend a hand. Everyone was whispering about logistics, flowers, food, and music, but Kemi could see it clearly. The wedding had become a battlefield of appearances and pride, and Ifeoma was quietly panicking beneath it all. As Ifeoma continued talking about golden decorations, live bands, and designer dresses, Kemi felt a strange calm settle over her. The woman who had mocked her, laughed at her, and made her feel small was now desperately chasing perfection she couldn't fully afford. And Kemi, who had long kept her own success hidden, realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the moment where things could change. She smiled softly to herself, keeping quiet, letting the family worry about costs, letting Ifeoma reveal her impatience and pride. Behind her calm, her mind was already turning, imagining the day when Here's a rewritten, more engaging and emotional version of the fourth beat in simple conversational English. That evening, the dining room was alive with chatter and clinking cutlery, but Kimmy could feel the tension building even before the first insult landed. Ifeoma had that familiar smug smile, the one that promised trouble, and she wasted no time. People like you, she said, her voice sharp and loud enough for everyone to hear, should be serving food, not sitting at the table with real women. The words stabbed at Kimmy like a cold blade. She felt her cheeks burn, her heart tighten, and for a moment, the laughter around the table seemed to echo inside her chest. Cousins giggled, aunts nudged each other, and her husband, Chike, looked embarrassed but didn't say a word. The insult was public, humiliating, and perfectly timed to make her feel small. But Kimmy didn't let her face betray her feelings. She took a slow, steady breath, pressing her lips into a calm smile. Inside, her mind was racing, replaying every past insult, every whispered remark about her humble background, every time she had been made to feel invisible. She felt the familiar sting of anger, but she also felt something stronger, quiet strength, the kind that didn't need to yell or argue to be noticed. As Ifeoma continued smirking, clearly expecting tears or a sharp reply, Kimmy sipped her water, letting the moment stretch. She met Ifeoma's gaze calmly, steady and unshaken, letting the silence speak louder than any words could. Everyone at the table could feel it. Something was shifting. The Kimmy they thought they knew, the timid, humble girl, was still there, yes, but behind her calm eyes, there was a fire they couldn't see yet. And in that moment, as the room continued its polite murmurs and chuckles, Kimmy made a silent vow. One day they would understand exactly who she was. One day she would turn all this mockery into a lesson they would never forget. For now she endured. But she was. Here's a rewritten, more engaging and emotional version of the fifth beat in simple conversational English. No one in the Adewale family had the slightest idea of Kemi's true life outside their home. To them, she was the quiet, modest wife who dressed simply, cooked without complaint, and never boasted about anything. They thought they knew her, laughed at her, judged her, but they didn't. Not once had they seen the life she had quietly built, the power she carried beneath her calm surface. After her father's death, Kemi's late uncle, a wealthy cocoa exporter in the city of Idun, had left her his entire business. It was booming, worth far more than anyone could imagine, and it required a sharp mind, patience, and careful decisions, qualities Kemi had in abundance. She managed it with the same grace and quiet confidence she showed in her daily life, never flaunting her wealth or letting it touch the eyes of those who had mocked her. She lived simply, shopped modestly, and attended family events like any ordinary wife, hiding the fact that she had the means to live a life of luxury if she chose. Her strength wasn't loud. It wasn't about flashy clothes or extravagant parties. It was the kind of power that came from knowing your worth, from standing tall while others tried to push you down. It was the quiet resilience that let her endure insult after insult, laugh after laugh, knowing that one day, the truth would speak louder than any sneer. As Ifeoma boasted about expensive halls and designer dresses, Kemi listened silently, letting the arrogance fill the room. The irony was delicious. Those who mocked her, those who thought her meek and powerless, were completely unaware of the force she carried. She didn't need to argue, threaten, or show off. One day her hidden strength would become visible, and it would leave them stunned. For now she smiled politely, poured tea, and kept her secret close to her heart. Inside, though, a plan was already forming, a qui. Here's a rewritten, more engaging and emotional version of the sixth beat in simple conversational English. The day the family visited Eagle Crest Banquet Hall, the grandeur of the place left Kemi quietly impressed, though she didn't let it show. High ceilings sparkled with crystal chandeliers, polished floors reflected the sunlight, and the air carried a faint scent of fresh flowers and luxury. Ifeoma, on the other hand, seemed overwhelmed, her excitement quickly giving way to panic. This is too much," she exclaimed, her hands flying to her face as she took in the price the manager had listed. Tears welled up in her eyes, not just from frustration, but from fear that her dream wedding might slip away. Her voice trembled. How could anyone afford this? It's impossible. Around her, the family murmured in agreement. Aunts shook their heads, cousins whispered, and even her mother frowned, muttering, "Maybe we should look for something smaller. This is too expensive for any normal family." The words stung, but Ifeoma didn't seem to notice. They were focused entirely on the hall, on the impossibility of it all. Kemi stood quietly at the back, her hands folded calmly, watching the scene unfold. She saw the desperation, the disappointment, and secretly, a little arrogance in Ifeoma's sense of entitlement. This was exactly the moment she had anticipated. The family had gathered here, imagining a problem they could not solve, thinking they were powerless. And yet, Kemi's mind was steady. She wasn't panicking. She didn't frown. Instead, she felt a quiet thrill, knowing that she held the solution to everyone's worry, an answer they had no idea existed. For years she had been underestimated, mocked and dismissed, but now at this hall filled with glittering crystal and lofty ambition, she was ready. The very thing they considered impossible would soon become reality, and when it did, no one would ever see her the same way again. As Ifeoma continued to fr. Here's a rewritten, more engaging and emotional version of the 7th beat in simple conversational English. Kemi stayed at the back of the hall, her eyes quietly taking in the scene. Ifeoma's face was streaked with tears, her hands wringing nervously as she pleaded with her parents about the cost. The rest of the family looked helpless, whispering and shaking their heads, convinced that the dream wedding was slipping further out of reach. The glittering chandeliers and polished floors suddenly felt cold and distant, as if mocking their despair. Kemi's heart beat steadily, a calm rhythm beneath the storm of tension. She had watched this family belittle her for years, judged her for her modest clothes, her quiet ways, even her background. They thought she was small, powerless, unworthy of their attention. But now, standing at the edge of their panic, she felt something shift inside her, a quiet, powerful resolve. Her mind ran through memories of every sneer, every whispered insult, every time Ifeoma had called her a servant. She had smiled through all of it, endured it and remained patient. And all those years of being underestimated, of hiding her strength, had prepared her for this moment. She knew she had the power to change everything in an instant. Kemi let her eyes drift over the hall again. The price list, the tears, the hopeless glances. A small smile tugged at her lips, not of malice but of calm certainty. "It's time," she whispered to herself. "Time to show them who I really am." No one noticed her in that moment, and that was perfect. She didn't need applause or recognition. She only needed the right time to act. And now, as the family fretted and Ifeoma trembled at the thought of disappointment, she felt the weight of years of quiet endurance ready to lift. With a deep breath, Kemi stepped forward just enough to be seen, her mind steady, her heart full. The moment of revelation was near. The woman they had laughed at, mocked, and dismissed af. Here's a rewritten, more engaging and emotional version of the 8th beat in simple conversational English. The manager's face was tight with professionalism, but his eyes betrayed his irritation. He had just finished explaining to Ifeoma and the rest of the family that without full payment, the reservation could not be held. "I'm sorry," he said, glancing at the spreadsheets, "but we can't proceed unless the full amount is settled today." Ifeoma's shoulders slumped, her lips trembling as she muttered, "This is impossible." The room felt heavy with tension, filled with whispered worries and desperate glances. Kemi had been quiet, standing slightly behind everyone, letting the panic swirl around her. Her heart beat steadily, her mind calm. She had watched them worry, watched them think the dream was slipping away. And now it was time. Without a word of hesitation, Kemi stepped forward, her posture straight, her calmness almost shocking in contrast to the chaos around her. The chatter quieted as heads turned. Even the manager blinked, taken aback by her presence and the serene confidence she carried. She looked him in the eye and asked, her voice steady and clear, "How much is the full payment?" A stunned silence fell over the room. Ifeoma froze, her mouth slightly open, and the family stared at Kemi as if she had suddenly become a stranger. The manager, fumbling slightly, repeated the number, clearly expecting hesitation, questions, or excuses. But Kemi simply nodded, her expression calm, almost gentle, yet filled with authority. Her presence alone shifted the energy in the room. The desperation, the embarrassment, the tension, all of it seemed to hang on her next move. Everyone could feel that something extraordinary was about to happen, though none of them could imagine what. For years they had dismissed her as quiet, weak, and unimportant. Now in this moment, the woman they had mocked for so long was about to show them that she was far more than any. Here's a rewritten, more engaging and emotional version of the 9th beat in simple conversational English. Before anyone could speak, Kemi reached into her handbag with calm, deliberate movements. She pulled out neat bundles of Naira notes, stacked and ready, and placed them carefully on the manager's desk. The crisp sound of the bills hitting the polished surface seemed to echo in the hall, louder than any voice. Gasps spread through the room like wildfire. Ifeoma's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide and unblinking. "What?" she stammered, her voice trembling with shock. Cousins, aunts, and uncles all froze, their whispered worries replaced by stunned silence. Even the manager paused, adjusting his glasses, trying to process what he was seeing. Kemi, calm and composed, simply watched, letting the silence do its work. The family's eyes darted from the money to Kemi, their minds struggling to catch up. The woman they had mocked, laughed at, and called a servant was now placing enough cash on the desk to pay for the grandest wedding hall in Idun, right in front of them. It was more than shocking. It was humbling. A quiet power radiated from her, a force they hadn't imagined existed. Ifeoma's face drained of color. She had spent weeks bragging, hinting, and expecting someone else to solve her problem, never imagining that the very woman she had insulted would be the one to save her. Her pride, her arrogance, her laughter at Kemi, all of it now felt painfully foolish. Kemi's eyes swept across the hall, meeting each family member's gaze briefly. No anger, no boastfulness, just calm, quiet dignity. "It's done," she said softly, almost to herself, and yet her words carried like a bell through the stunned silence. The bundles of cash weren't just payment, they were a statement, a reminder that worth isn't always loud, and strength isn't always visible. For the first time, everyone saw Kemi not as the modest, quiet wife they had underestimated, but as Samio. Here's a rewritten, more engaging and emotional version of the 10th beat in simple conversational English. The manager stared at the bundles of cash for a long, tense moment, then finally looked up at Kemi with a mix of surprise and respect. He straightened his posture and bowed slightly, his voice calm but carrying the weight of what had just happened. "The venue is fully paid in cash by Madam Kemi Adewale," he announced, his words echoing through the hall. The room fell completely silent. It was the kind of silence that made hearts pound and eyes widen. The family froze, caught between shock, disbelief, and the slow, creeping realization of what had just occurred. Ifeoma's hand still hovered near her mouth, and her eyes were fixed on Kemi, wide with astonishment. Cousins exchanged stunned glances, whispering quietly to one another, while aunts and uncles looked down, ashamed for underestimating her. Kemi stood tall, calm, and composed, letting the moment speak for itself. She didn't boast, she didn't smile triumphantly. Her power wasn't in arrogance, it was in quiet confidence. Every whisper, every sneer, every insult she had endured had led to this moment. And now the truth of her strength, her wealth, and her dignity could no longer be ignored. The manager's respect was not just professional, it was personal. He recognized the decisiveness, the calm authority, and the unshakable control she carried. It was rare, almost commanding, and it made the air in the hall shift. Kemi's presence alone had turned what had felt impossible into reality. Ifeoma's face paled completely, a mixture of shame and disbelief washing over her. The woman she had mocked, laughed at, and belittled in front of everyone had now taken the lead in a way she could never have imagined. The entire family, once so certain of Kemi's place in the household, was forced to reconsider everything they thought they knew about her. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted irreversibly. Here's a rewritten, more engaging and emotional version of the 11th beat in simple conversational English. Ifeoma's face drained of all color, leaving her looking smaller than she had ever felt. Her lips trembled, and her eyes were wide, staring at Kemi as if seeing her for the first time. The woman she had mocked, laughed at, and openly belittled in front of the entire family, the same woman she had called a servant, had just done something she couldn't comprehend. She had paid for her wedding every last naira in full and with calm grace. A wave of shame swept over Ifeoma, heavier than any embarrassment she had ever known. The arrogance that had filled her all these weeks, the boasting, the hints, the expectation that someone else would save her, it crumbled in an instant. She had assumed Kemi was powerless, meek, and unworthy, someone to be laughed at, And now, in one moment, that assumption was shattered completely. Her family watched silently, and Ifeoma could feel their eyes on her. Some looked impressed, others confused, and a few quietly whispered about Kemi's unexpected power. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. How could she apologize for years of insults and mockery? How could she explain away the arrogance that had blinded her to the truth? Kemi, standing calmly with the faintest, softest smile, didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The action itself spoke volumes. Stronger, louder, and far more cutting than any words could. And Ifeoma felt it deep inside, that sinking realization that she had underestimated Kemi in every possible way. For the first time, Ifeoma understood the woman she had dismissed. She wasn't just a wife, quiet and humble. She was powerful, patient, and unshakable. And in that hall, with the cash still neatly stacked on the manager's desk, Ifeoma felt a shame she would never forget, a lesson in humility that came from the very person she had tried to humiliate. If you want, I can. Here's a rewritten, more engaging and emotional version of the 12th beat in simple conversational English. The room buzzed quietly with whispers, low murmurs that carried shock, admiration, and guilt all at once. We never knew she had such power, one aunt murmured to another, her voice trembling with disbelief. All these years and we never saw it coming, another cousin whispered, shaking his head in stunned realization. The family had spent so long underestimating Kemi, judging her for her modest background, and now in one simple calm act, she had revealed a strength none of them had imagined. Some relatives couldn't meet her gaze at all. Their eyes darted nervously to the floor or to each other, ashamed of how cruel and dismissive they had been. They had laughed at her, mocked her, and even treated her like she didn't belong. Yet here she was, standing quietly, dignified, and completely in control. The weight of their past behavior pressed down on them, and it was uncomfortable in a way they could not ignore. Even the younger cousins whispered among themselves, unable to hide the awe in their voices. I can't believe she did that, she's amazing, one said. Another added, she didn't even brag. She just did it. The quiet confidence Kemi carried spoke louder than any words could have. She didn't need to shout or demand respect. Her actions alone had earned it. Ifeoma, still frozen in shame, watched as her family murmured, realizing they had all been wrong about Kemi. Their whispers, though hushed, were filled with the recognition they had denied her for years. Every look, every comment they had ever made in judgment was now reflected back at them, and for the first time, they understood that Kemi's quiet patience had masked a strength far beyond what they had imagined. In that moment, the murmurs became a chorus of respect, awe, and regret. Kemi's composure never wavered. She simply smiled softly, letting the silence, the whispers, and the real. Here's a rewritten, more engaging and emotional version of the 13th beat in simple conversational English. Kemi took a slow, steady breath and let a gentle smile grace her lips. The whispers around her quieted as every eye turned toward her, waiting, unsure what she would say. And then, in a voice soft but full of quiet strength, she spoke. I don't pay to prove myself, she said, letting each word sink in. I pay because love is stronger than pride. May your wedding bring you joy. Her words floated in the air, soft and unassuming, yet powerful enough to silence the entire room. There was no anger, no bitterness, only a calm generosity that left everyone stunned. Even Ifeoma, pale and speechless moments before, felt her chest tighten at the meaning behind Kemi's words. She realized in that instant that this act wasn't about showing off wealth or proving superiority. It was about grace, kindness, and the quiet strength of a woman who had endured so much and chosen dignity over revenge. The family sat frozen, their murmurs gone, replaced by a deep reflective silence. Some eyes glistened with unshed tears, others looked away in shame, while a few couldn't help but admire Kemi's composure. It wasn't just the payment that shocked them. It was the way she carried herself, the thoughtfulness behind her gesture, and the humility that accompanied her strength. Ifeoma's throat tightened as she tried to find words, but there were none that could match the weight of Kemi's grace. Her mockery, her pride, her expectations, they all felt small and foolish compared to the elegance and courage Kemi displayed so effortlessly. In that moment, the room felt different. Respect replaced judgment. Awe replaced ridicule. And Kemi, standing quietly yet radiantly, had shifted something deep within the hearts of everyone present. Her words were simple, but their impact was monumental. a reminder that true strength and love were never loud or boastful, yet always undeniable. Here's a rewritten, more engaging and emotional version of the 14th beat in simple conversational English. From that day on, everything changed in the ADEMOYE household. The laughter that once followed Kemi, the whispers that mocked her background, and the cruel comments from Ifeoma all vanished. No one dared call her a servant anymore. Instead, when her name was spoken, it was said with care, with respect, and sometimes even with a hint of awe. The family had finally realized that the woman they had underestimated was far stronger, wiser, and more capable than they had ever imagined. Even Ifeoma, once proud and mocking, now avoided hasty words, her arrogance replaced with quiet caution. Every glance she cast at Kemi was mixed with shame and a reluctant admiration. The entire family had witnessed a lesson in humility, patience, and dignity that would stay with them forever. They could no longer see Kemi as just a quiet, modest wife. They had seen her true worth, and it could not be ignored. Kemi, of course, carried herself just as she always had, calm, graceful, and unassuming. But now the atmosphere around her had shifted completely. People listened when she spoke. They sought her advice and respected her opinions. The small gestures of kindness and quiet authority that had once been overlooked were now recognized as the mark of someone remarkable. It wasn't just about wealth or power. The family understood that Kemi's strength came from patience, endurance, and the choice to act with grace, even when others had been cruel. Her quiet determination had turned ridicule into respect, insults into admiration, and judgment into understanding. From that day forward, the house felt different. Laughter at her expense no longer echoed in the halls. Instead, there was acknowledgement, a subtle reverence that spoke louder than any words could. The woman who had once been mocked and underestimated had become the standard, the quiet force that commanded respect. Here's a rewritten, more engaging and emotional version of the 15th beat in simple conversational English. In Idun, the story of Kemi Adewale spread like wildfire. People talked about the quiet, modest woman who had been mocked, laughed at, and even called a servant by her own family, but who stunned everyone by paying for her sister-in-law's entire wedding venue in cash. Social media buzzed with pictures of the Eagle Crest banquet hall, stacks of Naira notes, and captions praising Kemi's patience, dignity, and quiet strength. Everyone marveled at how she had endured years of insults and judgment without bitterness. And yet, when the time came, she had revealed a power and generosity that left her family speechless. The tale wasn't just about wealth. It was about a woman who had been underestimated, a woman whose patience and resilience had transformed humiliation into respect, mockery into admiration. People everywhere shared the story, inspired by her grace and courage. Even in Idun's bustling markets and busy streets, whispers of Kemi's name carried weight. Children repeated the story to their friends. Neighbors spoke of it with awe. And in every telling, the lesson was the same. Strength is not always loud, power is not always visible, and true dignity comes from the heart. Kemi continued her life quietly, unbothered by fame or recognition, but the impact of her actions lingered everywhere she went. She had shown that patience, quiet endurance, and selfless courage could turn the tables on anyone who underestimated you. And in Idun, everyone who heard her story would remember her name, and the lesson she had taught forever. If you want, I can now combine all 15 beats into a full 4,000-word script with smooth transitions, dialogues, and cinematic, emotional pacing ready to go viral. Do you want me to do that next?